This is Gemara Baba Basra Daf Kuf Ches, and all the learning for today, the Daf of Erev Yom Kippur. Such an auspicious day when we want to be Chosmeinu. Sefer HaChaim has been dedicated as a Schos Refuah Shalema for Tinoik ben Miriam Ahuva B'Siyata D'Shemaya. The learning of the entire Chabura Talmud Torah Kenegei Kulam should bring an incredible and complete Refuah Shalema to Tinoik ben Miriam Ahuva. I'm rolling the bottom of Kuf Zayin Beis as we wrap up the seventh parak, going into the famed eighth parak of Yesh Neichlim. Says the Mishnah, someone tells his friend, I'm selling you a half a field. He says he's selling half a field. He doesn't say which half. So what do we do? We put it in between them, the value, the quality of the field, v'noitel chatzi sadeyu, and the buyer takes half. Chatzi b'darim ani meich lecha. If the seller says, I'm selling you half of the southern half, mishamnon beinayam, again, the quality of the field goes in the middle, v'noitel chatzi b'darim v'mekabel olav, and v'noitel chatzi b'darim, excuse me. The seller accepts upon himself the place of the fence, charitz uben charitz, an area for a trench or a narrow trench. The kamu charitz, says the Mishnah, shisha tfachim uben charitz is shleisha tfachim. Before we move on to the Gemara, let's just take one moment. And Rashi points out this interesting terminology of Mishamna B'neiim, says Rashbam. The Gemara is going to discuss this in a moment. So says the Gemara, says the Gemara, Rava explains that the Lekech takes the Kechosh, the inferior part of the field, and the seller keeps the better part of the field. As Rechia Barabba, we learned to the Mishnah that the quality goes between them, which seems to say that they each get half, they each get part in the kchosh, part in the good stuff. So why are we saying that the lokeach has to take all the bad stuff? While you're eating dates in Bavel, we in Eretz Yisrael looked at the Seifa, the end of the Mishnah, and allowed that to shed light in the first part of the Mishnah. The Katani Seifia Chatzi B'darim Nimarchel Chamisham V'neven Et Chatzi B'darim. V'amai, why you think Chatzi B'darim? Misham Nimeneim Chatzi B'darim. Amarle, but he said Chatzi B'darim. Ela Lidmei. Hachanami Lidmei. So what must the Mishnah have meant? The Mishnah, the seller, the Meicher must have meant that he means the value of the southern half. So too by us, the first case of the Mishnah, he means to give him Chatzi B'sada in value, and therefore he could give the buyer the inferior part of the land, and he could keep the better part of the land, as it all has to just do with the damim, the value of the field. We continue at the end of Kuf Zayin Beis Mekabel Makom Geder V'Chulu. The Mishnah said that the seller accepts upon himself the place of the Geder, the fence, the charitz, the little charitz, the big charitz, etc. Says the Gemara, Ta'ana. It's just an interesting term. It seems the word Tanya, but Ta'ana over here means we learned in a Braisa. Charitz mi bachot uben charitz mi bafnim. What is the difference between these two things? The charitz, the trench, and the wide trench. Says the Gemara, the charitz, the wider trench, is mi bachot, is away from the fence. Uben charitz is on the inside of the fence. Zev is zev, but both of them, says the Gemara, achayre hageder. Both trenches are behind the fence, outside of the property. One is towards the fence, one is further away, but they're both on the outside of the property. And with that, we turn over to Kuf Chesem Beis, continues the Gemara and explains what is the reason. Kidei shaloi tehei chaya kofetzes, and the reason why they made a ditch near the fence is so that no animals are able to jump over the fence and into the property. Says the Gemara, V'levid charitz, l'levid ben charitz. What's the purpose, says the Gemara, that we're making, two different areas. Why are we making a wider trench, a smaller trench? Just make one trench that won't allow the animals to jump in. Says the Gemara, Aidi de Rava Kaimi Bigava Vikavsa. Since Lamais, the trench is very wide, the animal could go into the trench and jump over onto the fence, and that's why you need to have the wider trench away from the fence with a smaller trench in between the wider trench and the fence. Says the Gemara of Levi ben Charetz, La ben Charetz. Says Mar, but if that's true, then why don't they just make a narrower trench and not a wider trench? I did the cotton kaimi asfase bekavsa could stand on the lip and jump onto the fence, and therefore you have a smaller fence, a smaller ditch trench, a wider one next to it, so the animal cannot jump over the fence. And says the Gemara, concluding the paragraph, Kama ben Charetz leben Charetz, Kama bein, Charetz leben Charetz. How much space is there between? You have this wider trench, then you have the smaller trench. How much area is in between? Tefach, it's going to be one tefach. Hadron aloch beis kor chazara, of course. And now we begin the very, very famous parak of Yesh Noichlim, the 8th parak here in Baba Basra. As we continue our journey through Baba Basra, says the Mishnah, Yesh Noichlen u'manchilin v'yesh Noichlen v'loi manchilin. The name of the parak, Yesh Noichlen, gives away a lot of its topic, which is nachala, inheritance, which is the halachais, the unique halachais of inheritance, bequeathments, and how we'll deal with them in halacha. So says the Mishnah, there are people who both inherit, noichalin umanchilin, and bequeath. They get inheritance, and as well, they give inheritance, they bequeath to others. Then there are those that inherit, they get, but they don't give away. Manchilin, v'loy noichalin. There are those that give away inheritance, but don't get on their own. Loy noichalin, v'loy manchilin. Then there are those who don't inherit nor bequeath. 4 different categories in the Mishnah. Now, in classical Mishnayis sense, continues the Mishnah with explaining whom is in each category. Says the Mishnah, the following are those that inherit and bequeath to others. A father and his sons. The father gives to the sons gives to the father. It's a two-way street. The brothers from the fathers. As well, all of these cases, they both inherit and bequeath to one another. Now, when we go into the female category, a man to his mother, a man to his wife, and the sons of sisters, all of these inherit. However, they don't bequeath back to the other one. Ha'isha as baneha, concluding the, category 3 in the Mishnah. Ha'isha as baneha, a woman and her children. Va'ish as baila, Isha as baila, woman to her husband. Va'achei brothers from the mother. Manchilin, they give over inheritance. V'loy nechlin. Va'achem brothers from the mother. Loy nechlin v'loy manchilin. Before we go to the Gemara, let's take one moment. The Rashbam over here has a little bit of a hakdama. The first word of the Mishnah, yesh. Karayvin shenechlin as karayveim. Says the Rashbam, their relatives that inherit their relatives kishamisim when they die. V'gam imhim misim, and as well when they die, manchilin lohem, they inherit from the person near them that dies, and they give it back. They bequeath when they die. As umaynam dahainu sheshneim neichlin zeh. Haidlo katani yishnechlin zeh. Why does the Mishnah say neichlin zeh? Hainu mishud the Bible say seva neichlin v'loy manchilin taninam yisha neichlin u'manchilin. So Rashbam just points out that really what's going on is yishnechlin zeh v'yishmanchilin zeh. Because we want to have different categories, we keep the terminology the same. Therefore, the Mishnah teaches us that those that inherit and bequeath, inherit, do not bequeath, bequeath, do not inherit, neither bequeath nor inherit. Says the Gemara, begins the Gemara asking that the order of the Mishnah is very interesting. Why does it first say that the father inherits his son? It should first say that the son inherits his father, which of course is more of the likely and normal progression, of course, is that the child inherits the father. Says the Gemara Chada, number one, we don't want to talk about a case of the Aschuli Parvanusa Loi Mischalinan. We do not want, this is part of the kasha. Why do we talk about a case of a father inheriting a son? That's a case of Peranius, that the child died before the father. We don't like to start off a case of Peranius to start with the negative, number one. And we've turned over to Kuf Chesem Beis. It continues the Gemara in wondering, why is this the way that the Mishnah is worded? Void. It's a pasuk ishki yamusu banein lai. A person dies, doesn't have a son. So that's the normal order, that the person dies, and we discuss the inheritance with regard to his son. So why does the Mishnah say it in the reverse order, that the son dies and the father's inheritance in relation to his son? Answers the Gemara, Vitana Aidi da Asyala. Vitana, as regard to the Tana, why does it say the father inheriting the son first? Aidi da Asyale Midrasha Chavivale, a classical teretz, because we learn out a father inheriting the son from the Medrash, it's more Chaviv to the Mishnah. Umay Drasha. And what is this drasha in which we learn the father inheriting the son? The Tanya Se'irai Zeh Malami Cha'av Kodim La'achem, the father inherits before the brothers. When a child dies, Yachle Kodim Laban, you would think the father gets even before the son's own children. Tamlemer HaKaraiv, Karaiv, Kaidem. The one that is closer comes first, and therefore one's own children, of course, comes first. But after one's own children does not come the brothers, but rather comes the father next. Ask the Gemara, my Rois, the Rabbi Saben, Eloiti Zach, Marbani Saben, Shekin Kamdak Azav Liada. Why are you telling me to be marba, the son inherits the father before, and then comes the father, and that is an exclusion to the brothers? We should, so says you know why? Because the child does yiyah to the father's maidservants, so stay achuza. But says the Gemara, why? Of course. So in a way, one's brothers have a closer relationship. Says the Gemara, with this we conclude, there's only Yibam when there's no child. So the only time we can come on to Yibam is when there's no son. So if there's a son, of course the son comes first. And therefore that is the reason why the son comes first, then comes the father. Says the Gemara, 1 second. It sounds like time with Hai Pircha. Halav Hachi, if not for this Pircha of Yibam, then what? I would have thought it sounds like there's a real, reputable Havamina that the brother comes first. Says the Gemara, typically, but we should say the Hachi Tarti Vachi Chada. As we turn over to Kavtesam and Aleph, ask the Gemara, why don't we say that with regard to the son, there are two ways in which a son takes over the father. With regard to the brother, there's only one area. The son does both Yiyod and Stei Achuza, and the brother does only Yibam. So ask the Gemara, you're answering that there's not always Yibam, but that's not the reason. The reason is very simply that the son has an extra area that he comes in the place of the father. Answers the Gemara, and with this we'll conclude. Stei Achuza, Gufa Mehaitaima. Says the Gemara, Kufa Ma'itaimu the Kakaimlis. The Achuza comes from this din for the Tana. Klom Yibam, Bamakim Shein Ben, Hayesh Ben, Aim, Ein Yibam. But if nobody's no Yibam, so the Achuza comes from this. So it's not that it's 2 versus 1, it's all the same Svara. We'll start from here, we'll pick it from here, B'siyata Dishmaya.